food security, and even services, with the hope that we are investing in a much more clear way that we are able to achieve sustainable economic development by also protecting the planet for the future. So the reason why I think we are putting the nature at heart is because we understand, especially in this generation we are living, that climate change or environment is at the core center of every economic development that we are looking, especially in Africa. So if, for example, you are in infrastructure, or if you are into real estate, or let's say food security, anything that you're going, even in employment, everything is kind of linked with how our continent is being responsive to the climate change. And as we know now that Africa is a vulnerable continent in terms that the past climate inaction of the world is putting us at the center of really being of receiving all the negative impacts of climate change. So we are experiencing flooding, erosion, cyclone, typhoon, sea level rise, and all of these impacts are costing our country development plan, our GDP. So technically, events that we did not cause are stealing away our future. But yet we are also a continent that is not really giving up, because we also believe that we are home of homegrown solution. That's why I like the concept of green transition. A green transition, because for me, is a way that we are going to ensure. So, for example, in the energy sector, we are going to ensure that Africa is going to be a next stop of energy production, but in a manner that is going to allow the energy to be, first of all, for Africans, and then to the rest of the world. So this kind of a concept is really inspiring, especially for us youth, because we are able to see our future through having a proper just transition of our economy. So we're able to have a way to dream of proper job creation in also in a manner that is going to allow us to protect our community. But although Africa and my country, we have those kind of understanding and the kind of willingness, the only challenge that we face is the lack of finance for our projects. So yes, we know that for sometimes we've been like picturized to not having sustainable project or having youth-led projects that are available, but now the era have changed, because now countries are able to work with the private sector, with the public sector, and with the government in creation of sustainable projects. So what we need to see is more of the willingness into investing in green investment. So green investment, which is a way that is going to allow our planet to be healthy and allowing us also to have a proper future, but most importantly, also protecting our planet for the next generation. I thank you so much for listening, and I really hope that we are going to be able to have a very good outcome in the summit. Thank you. I hope you can still hear me.
We can hear you very well. Thank you so much for this message. More willingness for green investment is exactly the message that we're discussing here. And we thank you very much for participating in this summit, Inessa. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And next on our agenda here, we have a different address. We've got Towards a Circular Economy Storytelling from Eva Gouwen, CEO of Fairphone.
Hello, my name is Eva Gouwens and I am the CEO of Fairphone. And Fairphone is a Dutch social enterprise. We started in 2010 as a campaign to raise awareness around what's going wrong in the industry of electronics, and then specifically about conflict minerals and the mining of these minerals that fuel the conflicts in the DRC. But to prove that things could be done differently, we became an enterprise in 2013 and we launched our first device. End of last year, we launched our fourth device, the Fairphone 4. And our mission has been from the start, and still is, By establishing a market for ethical electronics, we try to motivate the industry to act more responsibly. And that is needed, because this industry has an attitude of make, use and dispose again. To explain this, a few figures. Every year, 1.4 billion devices are sold globally. And we use those devices on average between 2 to 3 years. But then after use, less than 50% actually gets recycled. And if you just combine these numbers, 1.4 billion devices every 2 to 3 years, 85% actually turns into waste. No surprise that e-waste became one of the fastest growing waste streams worldwide. We produce 50 million tons of it every year, which is an equivalent of throwing away 1,000 laptops every second. And this doesn't only have a negative effect on the environment with its material waste and CO2 emissions, but also on the people working in this supply chain, because the short-term attitudes creates often hazardous and unsafe working conditions. The challenge is to make a fair transition towards the circular economy. We want to extend the lifetime of our products and set up a fair and transparent supply chain. And we've defined 4 key areas where we want to create a difference: fair materials, fair factories, longevity, and reuse and recycling. And in all of those areas, we step by step improve our phones and our supply chain. And we do that in order to raise the bar for other industry players and to invite them to come along and join in on the solutions we've established to jointly work towards fairer electronics. An example of how we put this into practice. At Fairphone, we encourage people to keep their device in use longer, and therefore we make Fairphones easy to repair and recycle. Fairphones are modular, which means they consist of 7 different modules. And put together, these modules form the smartphone. This modularity allows for consumers to easily repair a broken module at home. You don't need complicated equipment to do this. Just a screwdriver is enough. So imagine if you break your display, you can easily repair it at home, or swap your battery when it's no longer charging fast enough. But this modularity also allows for easy upgrades like a camera. While keeping the rest of the materials in use, a new camera module allows you to upgrade the functionality. The last advantage of modularity is that it also allows for easier recycling if you compare it to the average device that is often glued together. Other examples of how we put our mission into practice is, for example, that a Fairphone is e-waste neutral, which means that for every device that we bring to the market, we also ensure one device is properly recycled or reused. We were also the first manufacturer to integrate Fairtrade Gold in our supply chain, and we're constantly improving the amount of responsibly sourced materials in our phones. We also were the first smartphone manufacturer to pay a living wage bonus to the workers at our direct suppliers, to ensure that the people who make our phones actually can afford a decent standard of living. Currently, we are available in stores across Europe, for example at T-Mobile or Vodafone or Orange. And in 2020 and 2021, despite the pandemic, Fairphone was profitable. And this is important because I want to show that it is possible to, on one hand, make more ethical choices in your business, and on the other hand, be commercially successful. And when we started, sustainability wasn't a big topic in this industry. And we're now happy to see that more and more players in this industry take our philosophy of sustainability and fairness at heart. There is still a lot of work to do, since the core of the economic system hasn't changed. In fact, it became worse, because the business models of this industry still rely on selling more and more devices. and longevity or the rapid life cycles still haven't been addressed. System change doesn't happen overnight. It requires companies and legislators, investors and consumers to work hand in hand. So let's do it together. Let's start now. Please join in.
Let's do it together and let's start now. We're going to go to discuss some of this, of course, during the next session, which will be the first session of the afternoon of the EU Sustainable Investment Summit. This we're going to be talking about being bold and taking initiatives. But the introduction to this session, let's now hear from Mike Bloomberg, UN Secretary General Special Envoy for Climate Ambitions and Solutions.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for taking part in this summit. In recent months, we've increasingly seen the enormous risks of climate change become reality, from the devastating flooding in Pakistan and Florida to heat waves and droughts in Europe and the U.S. At the same time, the invasion of Ukraine has underlined how investing in clean energy is also an urgent security issue. Working together, we can knock down barriers that stand in the way of investment. This year, Bloomberg joined President Macron to launch a new effort to bring together standardized data on corporate emissions and make it available to everyone, everywhere. We're also leading a public-private partnership to bring more financing to emerging markets. It's called the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative, and so far, we've launched pilot projects in India and Colombia. And with the European Commission, we're helping to lead the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which includes more than 12,000 cities. Cities account for the majority of emissions, and they can learn a lot from each other as they work to cut them. Climate change is a global challenge that requires global collaboration. So let me thank everyone for coming together, and all the best.
And now to the introductory keynote address by Mairead McGuinness, member of the European Commission.
Good afternoon. I think we all know too well the many difficult challenges facing Europe and the world. Energy prices have risen because of Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine. And that comes on top of the climate crisis that we urgently need to address. So the stakes are high. And the answer is to be bold and to take the initiative. We need to harness the power that we already have at our disposal. In the EU, we have a regulatory agenda which is specifically designed around sustainable finance, and we have the EU budget. But we should also look to new areas, new initiatives, and new ways of doing things to find a path towards a sustainable and innovative Europe. The European Green Deal is our plan to address the climate crisis. It sets a target of climate neutrality by 2050. But most of the technologies that will allow us to be net zero in 2050 are not there yet. For example, we'll need advanced batteries and long-term storage. That will help us electrify more sectors and back up renewable energy sources. And we need to scale up the use of green hydrogen to help decarbonise transport. New technologies need constant financing support, and we know that getting access to finance can be difficult. And then innovative forms of financing need to reach the right scale, because the amounts we need to invest are enormous. Over this decade alone, Europe will need around an extra 390 billion euros of investment every year to meet the 2030 target to reduce emissions in both energy and transport. And we'll need another 130 billion euros for other environmental goals, like tackling pollution and restoring biodiversity. We need finance. We need a lot of it, and it needs to come from a wide range of sources. So how can we help open up these sources of finance? Now, first, we're already using our regulatory power in the European Union to direct investment towards the green transition. We've put in place tools to signpost the road we need to take with the EU Sustainable Finance Agenda. And the idea is to identify environmentally sustainable investments and to increase transparency on sustainability. So to start with, we need a common definition of what sustainability means. For this, we have the European Union taxonomy, a classification system that identifies criteria for an economic activity to be considered sustainable. And that includes things like best-in-class aluminium manufacturing, energy-efficient data centres, or recovering material to reuse from waste. By doing this, we help point investors and project promoters towards credible sustainable investments, including in innovations that are in the vanguard when it comes to reaching net zero. The taxonomy underpins the EU Green Bond Standard, which will allow companies raise financing for green projects. And it will give investors a credible label that they can rely on. We also have the recently agreed Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. This strengthens the rules on companies reporting on their social and environmental impact. Our work increases transparency on green and sustainable investments. It protects investors from greenwashing so that misleading, vague or false claims about sustainability do not undermine growing interest in this market. And it will allow investors to direct their money where it's most needed and to find suitable, sustainable investments. Second, we're harnessing the power of the EU budget to invest in sustainability and to mobilise investment in innovation. And here I want to focus on InvestEU. It offers support to financial institutions and investors by covering part of the financing risks through guarantees. It also offers advice on developing and implementing green projects. And InvestEU also includes direct financing, like finance for the development, construction and operation of solar plants in Greece. If we want to get to our 2050 goals, we need to support sustainable and innovative projects, and this is a top priority of InvestEU. We expect InvestEU to mobilise around €110 billion for climate-related projects by 2027. InvestEU is a great example of how public support can help mobilise private finance. And the world of private finance has vast potential to support this transition to sustainability. The traditional routes are loan finance by banks and long-term investors, and equity finance by investment funds. They will be hugely important to drive investment in innovation and the transition. But alongside these more established paths, we're also seeing new ways emerging for raising finance for sustainable projects. Take the EU Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy as one example. It was launched in Europe in 2008, and it now brings together more than 9,000 local governments from across 57 countries to invest in clean solutions. Raise Green is an example of an impressive initiative taken by individuals with a simple principle at its very core: to match offer and demand for climate financing online. And this allows citizens to invest their savings in sustainable projects proposed by the platform. So there are many initiatives taken by individuals, groups of citizens, by mayors of cities and so on. We're seeing public funds combined with private finance in different forms, underwriting some private risks to help attract investors to higher-risk, innovative investments. Combining private and public guarantees is a smart way to help scale up economically viable projects and long-term investments like the renovation of buildings. This can include the pooling of resources from public budgets and philanthropic investors or foundations. Green bonds or project bonds are another way to mobilise finance for green investments, whether that's for companies, a portfolio of projects, or even one large investment. And no source is too small. Crowdfunding platforms, which allow people to pool smaller-scale finance, can be a very effective tool to finance projects. We also see a lot of promise in local and regional finance initiatives that collect funding for investments with a positive environmental or social impact at local level or at regional level. So in the European Commission, we're using our regulatory power to direct investment towards innovation and sustainability. And we're directly funding climate solutions through the EU budget. But we also stand ready to support new ways of mobilising finance for the green transition and innovative investments, because we need to use all the tools we can in the fight against climate change. And that means thinking in new and bold directions beyond the traditional ways of doing things. I've talked about some of the new ideas on financing that are already in the mix, but I'm sure the panel that will follow will have many more ideas. And I encourage all of you participating and listening today to spark new ideas with each other, so that together we can take the action we need to get to net zero by 2050. And that date is closer than we might think. So now is the time for action. Thank you.
Well, we're going to definitely discuss some of those ideas, and we're looking forward to hearing from you, those joining us online, also on your ideas. Please do reach out, and maybe you have the idea that will be then taken by so many people who are here in the room and also by Brussels, who knows. So we're going to go to the session, Be Bold, Take Initiatives, Financing the Transition and Accelerating Innovation. Now, this panel will explore indeed new ways to mobilize finance for sustainable investments, such as increasing use of blending operations, crowdfunding equity platforms, citizen-led financing communities, all these to accelerate the emergence of breakthrough technologies and other initiatives. We will review different outside-the-box initiatives that have emerged in recent years to accelerate the transition towards sustainable economy. And we're going to do that with these speakers. Now, some of them are here with me on stage, and some of them will join us also virtually. Now, with me on stage, Ieva Valiskaitė, Vice Minister of the Economy and Innovation from Lithuania. Great to have you here. Andrej Kusvek, President of the Nordic Investment Bank. And Thomas Ostros, Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Great to have you here. Thank you so much. And joining us online also we have Abigail Binay, Mayor of Makati from the Philippines and member of the Board of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, and Franz Horstrasser, CEO of Raise Green. Thank you so much for joining us today at the EU Sustainable Investment Summit. Great to have you. Now, when it comes to thinking outside of box, and this is such a tricky thing because at the same time it's huge because the opportunities are absolutely endless, but at the same time it's a bit tricky and not so easy. Now, Thomas, I would like to start with you. What's the European Investment Bank position on these initiatives? What is it that you can share from the EBU view?
Well, I must say, when it comes to one of the issues that was mentioned here, crowdfunding, to be able to support maybe micro-enterprises, social enterprises, that is a very important part of an ecosystem that we must have. If we are going to be able to reach the target when it comes to climate, we need to improve the capital markets and the lending markets in Europe so that we support innovations in all types of versions going forward. We work a lot, not with crowdfunding, but we work a lot with trying to foster that lending and capital market, both inside and outside EU. Was it Ineza from Rwanda? We have had a really good speech, and we have a lot of operations in Rwanda. For instance, the other week I signed a deal with the Rwandan Development Bank on how to improve the possibilities for female entrepreneurs in Rwanda to get adequate financing. We work a lot with local banks all over Africa in how to improve funding for smallhold farmers. Most banks do not deal directly with smallhold farmers. So we provide advisory to the bank, local bank, could be in Malawi, for instance, but we also provide financing to the bank, so the bank itself can provide financing to the smallhold farmer to improve, from a green perspective, their production. All the way to what we do in Europe, where we have many interesting venture debt deals, where we as a bank take additional risks, investing by giving a loan that is almost like equity to innovative high-tech companies in the field of life science or energy technology that can provide them the boost that they need, maybe with 20 million euros or 50 million euros, to expand on the European and global markets. So I think we need to have all of these tools available to be able to support innovation, because we are in massive need of innovation to be able to reach the climate targets.
But do you also see more of those initiatives recently? Because what we have heard today as well since the morning at the summit is that because, of course, of the difficult situation, specifically because of Russian invasion of Ukraine, the acceleration is here. So, and this hardship and this hard, complicated situation also implicates there is more initiative, there are more ideas of going there outside of that box.
Yes, for me, 2 days ago, last Wednesday, was a very specific day because we had a board meeting, and the board, our board of directors, took a very bold decision. We are quite a big financer of renewable energy. We finance about 10 to 12 billion euros per year. But the board actually took a decision on management's proposal to invest additional 30 billion euros that will create 115 billion euros of investments in renewable energy, in electric grids, interconnections and in energy efficiency and in innovation right now, because it is so needed because of this brutal aggression from Russia against Ukraine. At the same day, actually, Bill Gates visited the bank, and we signed a deal to cooperate on innovations in the field of energy, because it is so important to get prices down on all levels on these innovations so it can be practically implemented on the markets and thereby supporting ordinary people's way of living. So I think last Wednesday was for me an exciting day in that respect.
Well, watch out, Thomas, because with the 30 billion extra euros that you just mentioned, this is not the pledge that you're going to bring at the end of the panel. We're going to wait for more pledges from you in this case. Andrej Kjusvik, President of the Nordic Investment Bank. Let's go with you, because I'm wondering what is your perspective on how public funding can effectively attract private investors with tools like risk-sharing arrangements, for example. What's your take on this?
Thank you for inviting us to this panel, first of all. When I was reading the small script and crowdfunding, I was thinking I'm invited to the wrong panel. But I would like to say that as Nordic Investment Bank or as an IFI, we always see ourselves as part of the service industry. What we really need to do is to help the real economy, the enterprises, entrepreneurs to do what they want to do and enhance the innovation. So I would say on the innovation side, we need to innovate both on the side of technology, and that's, of course, reducing the carbon emissions and then also working on adapting to the climate change as it happens. But we also need to innovate on the financing. And I think on the financing side, it's really important to say, and Thomas called it ecosystem perhaps, that every project, they need different layers of funding. You know, no project is bankable without equity. So you would really need, you know, the project sponsors, the promoters to put down some of their own skin into the game. You need exactly this crowdfunding, you know, perhaps family and friends, private equity, venture capital type of investments. You can then put on new layers to it, you know, mezzanine capital, subordinated debt, etc., until you find, you know, the really big money in the kind of senior debt layer. And we have been doing long-term loans. So we are really the ones that are coming with relatively bigger amounts, perhaps not the riskiest layer of those, but we do provide longer-term funding, which then helps others to fund, including the commercial banks.
And now let's go from the European Investment Bank and Nordic Investment Bank. Let's go to you, Eva. That's very interesting to hear your view and your take on this from Lithuania. Now, when it comes to some of the innovations, when it comes to, for example, startups and their innovations, that might be something that we've heard now, but you're going to share more of some of the challenges and the difficulties that they might face. Although, as we've heard today from Paolo Gentiloni, he said earlier that because of the current crisis, many businesses are facing challenges that they shouldn't have been facing as well. So share with us, what are those challenges?
Sure, thank you very much for having me here. It's really great to be here in this very diverse panel. We all come from all walks of life in here. So actually, we were talking about crowdfunding, and in Lithuania we started to talk with our startup businesses and asking them, like, what do you need? You know, it's a very straightforward answer that we wanted to get from them. And I always was a very huge crowdfunding enthusiast. I thought, like, oh my God, crowdfunding must be the way to fund your startup if I'm ever going to do that, yeah? But
we have this is also something, sorry to interrupt you, but this is also something that has not been that massive even like a year or 2 years ago, isn't it?
And
there is this
and especially progress in Europe, I guess, yeah? So we asked our Lithuanian startups, do you use platforms for crowdfunding? And actually they said that crowdfunding might be a very good way to fund your business, but only in some cases. Because crowdfunding platforms, such as Kickstarter, for example, they are very huge. You really need to stand out of a crowd. You need to have a very strong brand. You need to have a very strong marketing campaign. And for some businesses that are really starting it, it's really hard. It's really hard to stand out of a crowd. And such platforms as, for example, the Kickstarter I mentioned before, they are mostly used by businesses that offer business to clients products, yeah? But they are not so beneficial to those businesses that, for example, offer business-to-business solutions that are mostly services and stuff like that. So those companies that are offering business-to-business services, they say that these platforms may not be the best way to fund finance. And of course, I mentioned before, it is very expensive to have a big marketing campaign, and the finance is not guaranteed. So when you enter the platform, you don't know how much money will you raise or if you will raise any money. And yet, Lithuanian business, they tend to rely on, of course, business angels, venture capitalists, and as you mentioned before, of course, friend, family, and fools.
Yeah.
It's the third F, yeah. And as a policymaker, I was thinking about, maybe friends, family, and fools are some kind of a formula for us. Maybe we should think about that in the government, because why do, for example, family members lend money to startups? Because they have trust and they have belief in your idea or in you personally. Why do fools invest in startup companies? They want big risk and they accept big risk because they want huge gains, yeah? And friends only tend to lend you as much money as they are not afraid to lose, So maybe governments should also think this way, so we can put some trust in startups. They should understand that gains come with increased risk, and of course, as we are dealing with taxpayers' money, we should invest such amount that we are not afraid to lose.
Well, that's an interesting take on that. It's about finding that middle ground and something in between these family, friends, and fools, but also then obviously taking this measure on a bigger scale afterwards when it comes to the cities, the countries, and the investment banks as well. Abigail Bina, Mayor of Makati, the Philippines. Now, what's your take on this? Because I've seen you reacted to what Eva was saying here when it comes to this approach.
Well, we don't have crowdsourcing in the Philippines, but I'm listening to the perspective of the bankers. I'm very happy that there is a fund for your climate initiatives, but as a local government, it's so difficult to access funding to access financing for our green initiatives. And of course, when you transition to green, it costs money. And I think there's a very huge disconnect between the financing and being able to create bankable green initiatives, which is crucial for you to take out, whether it be a loan, a grant, or crowdsourcing for that matter. It has to be a viable and sustainable green initiative. And fortunately for the Philippines, we do have a lot of plans for our climate mitigation and adaptation. But again, funding is crucial. And unfortunately, not so rich municipalities or local government units even consider a climate adaptation or climate mitigation plan because our priorities are different, but I'm very hopeful that there is a connect. Poverty is connected to climate change. Disaster is connected to climate change. There is loss in lives and there's economic loss every time there's a disaster in a country. So hopefully you'll be able to get access to financing from whether international or local banks or even from World Bank, because it's something that we really, really need to be able to finance our green initiatives.
But let me stay with you here because, I'm going to just bring that up. The Covenant of Mayors was launched in 2008 in Europe with the ambition to gather local governments voluntarily committed to achieving and exceeding the EU climate and energy targets. Now, given your perspective here and your take on this, I understand the difficulty of attracting the financing, as you've just mentioned, but how can cities contribute to this innovation more? Could you give us examples there?
Well, there are local financing that you can. The thing is with banks, they usually focus more on national loans or national financing or national programs. That's the reason why GCOM, the purpose of GCOM is to have a more aggressive position. Sorry.
That's all right. We've got more participants here in the session.
Have a more aggressive, to have a more aggressive approach, and to reiterate that it's the cities that are most vulnerable. That's why the cities are more aggressive when it comes to our climate initiatives, and that banks, loans, financing should not just be focused on a national level, but also on a subnational, regional, and city level. So we're hoping that COP27 will be able to focus on that cities are the drivers. We are the ones that are most affected, and we're the ones that need the financing.
Thank you so much. Franz Horstrasser, CEO of Raise Green. Now, let's get to you now, please, because first of all, tell us a bit more about the concept of Raise Green, because that's an equity digital platform open to all of the investors. But in some cases, as we've heard, financing could be very complicated to get as well. So tell us your concept. What's that?
Yes, thank you so much, Sasha, and hello, everyone, at the Sustainable Investment Summit. It's wonderful to be here. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can hear you very well.
Terrific. Great. So Raise Green is a climate investment platform. So I've been piqued in my interest in listening to this discussion around crowd investing and its role in catalyzing larger chunks of financing, because that's what we do. We do crowdfunding. We're the first inclusive funding portal in the U.S. that is focused on climate solution projects with a social mission. So for those who are overwhelmed by the climate crisis, tired of being told to recycle or petition their way out of the problem, Raise Green is the community financing platform that enables everyone to join the ranks of the heroic entrepreneurs and innovators that are powering the transition from dirty to clean energy by investing your own money, as little as $100, directly into climate solution projects like solar on a school, energy efficiency for low to moderate income housing, or even climate tech startups. And so we enable folks to put their money to work and also earn a healthy return. And I think Mayor Binet actually hit the nail on the head there, that, access is everything. Access to capital, but also access to investment opportunities is everything in this day and age as we work to accelerate climate solutions and empower communities that may have been left behind through previous economic advancement.
Let me be a little bit of a, to spoil this little party a little bit here. Whilst we have been observing so much of innovative ideas and approaches on different levels when it comes to smaller startups to a bit bigger businesses, they grow as well, how they change from the initiative from the cities and then the platforms, I will still repeat one of the biggest buzzwords here, regulation. Now, how can we also regulate all of that? And first of all, I think I'm going to ask you that, and then I will go to you, please.
Well, this is a very broad question indeed. But let me
it is broad because also it's hard to take. I mean, if I go into innovation per innovation, idea per idea, we're never going to...
Let me try with an example where I think regulation could be of great importance. One of the great innovations on the European continent in recent years have been the first lithium-ion battery factory, largest one in Europe, established in northern Sweden. We were part of that journey. First, with the great opportunity that the Commission gives us via guarantees to support an energy demonstration plant, a smaller demonstration plant that made everybody sure that this is going to work and this is going to be commercially viable. And then by financing from our side with quite a large ticket, the huge plant that is now established and working in northern Sweden. And Nordic Investment Bank is a colleague of ours that is also involved. Okay, now we have that established and we have plans for other factories all over Europe. This will be an issue coming up what happens when other countries, maybe not as keen as Europe, on environmental standards, on raw material extraction, on all the value chain, offers cheaper batteries but not environmentally sustainable. Here I think you need to think in terms also of regulation. So we establish a platform for what is a sustainable type of battery that we're going to use. And so thereby we can foster an industry that really helps us to become greener. So I think innovation and regulation, I'm a free trader in my base. I was Minister for Trade, so I always inclined to think about free trade. But we need also a basic platform on what is environmental sustainable.
That's right. Please.
If I may just echo, I think part of it is regulation in its formal sense, but part of it is also consumer demand. And I think that's really important. You know, we have moved from, you know, regulated world into investors demanding more sustainable solutions. You know, the green bonds that have been issued, which then again enable that. As I said, there are different layers of risk. Mm-hmm. For each risk layer, you need to find an investor. And I think, you know, the banks are the great aggregators of it, that, you know, both EIB and NIB, we issue our own green bonds, which are being invested in by, you know, large pension funds, asset managers, central banks, and so on. So we really tap the big money, and then we will be able to distribute that into smaller projects. I think the Northvolt example that Thomas brought up is fantastic, because you can see, I mean, they have been able to raise 8.5 billion euros of mostly private money for a fairly risky project. And I think that is exactly where you can see that there is investor interest, but there is also the consumer interest. And, you know, sometimes it's one kind of reason to be, why it's great to be a banker, because you go to the credit committee meeting and you see here, you finance a wind farm here, then you finance a battery plant, then you finance a car company that changes from fossil fuel to complete electric, then you find you know, a postal company, government-owned, that changes all their vehicle fleet to electric vehicles, and so on. So you see the whole value chain. And again, you know, I think that's the beauty of it. You need to put it all together, and then you need to have the grid taking the electricity to the correct place at the correct time in the correct volume. So I think we need to completely rethink the way we produce, deliver, use, and eventually recycle materials, because we still live in a very physical world, however much we want to digitalize, but a lot of it around us still need to be physically produced.
Thank you. Yeah, what's your take?
It's very hard for me because I'm actually working in the ministry and I'm responsible for deregulation, so it's a very hard topic for me. But Lithuania
that's it, you know,
is currently
deregulation to regulation and vice versa.
I was trying to think about how can regulation help, and actually one example that I thought of is Lithuania is currently number 10th in the world in global fintech index, and Lithuania is first in the Europe regarding to fintechs that have a license in place. So, and that was due to not only deregulation, but also as well because we have very clear rules established in our country. So, and of course, fintechs work and they do accelerate other businesses as well. They not only are themselves innovative companies, but they do accelerate other innovative companies as well. So I think that some fair level playing field, clear rules may work as regulatory practices that help not only fintechs but other sustainable business growth.
Could you give us some examples?
About regarding regulation,
yeah.
I mean, yeah. So maybe I'm trying to think right now. Lithuanian, for example, right now the main issue, which also was accelerated by Putin's war in Ukraine, is crypto sector regulations. Of course, it is a very sensitive question, but right now we are working on it in Lithuania, and we are thinking and we are making new guidelines for the whole fintech industry. But I think that we must start thinking about crypto regulations as well, because of course it is a new technology, but it is something that we still need to think about in the future, and we have to prepare clear rules and regulatory practices for those companies that are, you know, sustainable, that are reliable, and that cause less risk, you know.
Thank you, Franz. Would you follow up on the importance of regulation, deregulation, but also having the clear and fairly established rules there? Because you've got examples on that.
Absolutely. And, I got my start working in the Obama administration, being on the government side of regulation. So got to learn it from that side. And I think what the minister is saying is spot on, which is, ultimately it's the responsibility of government to create the enabling environment for innovation to rise up and for businesses to want to come to different jurisdictions. One beautiful innovation that the EU has recently implemented is EU-wide crowd investing policy that allows portals that are registered in one EU country to sell across border across the entire EU. So at Raise Green, we're excited about that because we are partnering with an EU-based funding portal to open up transatlantic investment opportunities. And I think that's a tremendous source of not just startup capital. Andre, I think it was you that mentioned that we need sponsor equity, which is very hard to get for an early stage developer to come in order to seed that project, in order to get it across the line, so that your bank and Thomas's bank can actually lend to it as it grows and as the business advances and the projects become proliferated. And so loosening up the forms and access to capital through regulatory action, I think the EU taxonomy is a tremendous step forward in that, giving clarity to businesses so that they know what constitutes a green investment and what doesn't. And similar with the green bond principles, which we're a huge fan of as well. So there's a vital role there for regulation, not just as the stick, but also as the carrot to drive and attract innovation and entrepreneurs to come to new jurisdictions and start and continue to expand their businesses there.
Thank you so much. Let me, exactly on this note, let me go to Mayor Binay. With the initiative that you are in, that it gathers over 9,000 local and regional authorities across 57 countries. And I know that one of the key things for you is also the importance and the strength of the technical and methodological support offered by the dedicated offices. So how does that help you out when it comes to this approach of a carrot as well?
Well, I think we also have to take into consideration the national government. As a case in point, when you're discussing about regulation, the Philippines is now shifting from the use of fossil fuels to zero carbon emissions. And we are also we're changing our law by opening foreign investments so that our power plants or our renewable energies, funding for renewable energy power plants, to encourage them to come into the city. So without these initiatives coming from the national government, you follow the lead from the national government. So whatever the national government does supports or helps the initiatives of the local cities. So there are a lot of financing available. It's just that there really has to be a technical support on how to make your projects bankable. Because if I go to the bank and they say, oh, this is my project, but it doesn't have enough meat, and you're coming from a country like the Philippines or a country from Africa or a country in Africa, you don't have the technical, you need the technical support to be able to bring your project to the European banks to say, I need your money, sir. Can you please finance my climate initiatives? And these, and it really requires technical support for you to be able to get that, it's like getting any loan in any bank. You have to ensure that your project is bankable.
Thank you so much. And on this note, I will now bring the pledges to all of the speakers, because I do want to give you a little bit more time. Now, I would really want to hear from you the pledges that you're ready to make here. Watch out. We will check on them next year. We will make sure that, we ask you about those. Everything is recorded. Everything stays online. But what I want to also to ask you, that's why I would like to give you a little bit more time than 30 seconds for pledges each, is because I want you to give your pledge, but also explain why this pledge is important or how you want to do that. So to give you a little bit, let's start with you. Your pledge.
Thank you very much. It's my first time in EU Sustainable Investment Summit. I was terribly afraid that we have to make a personal pledge, like going vegan or buying zero
we can do that
next
as well.
year.
We can.
But I'm relieved. I'm relieved actually. And to start from why. Lithuania right now produces about 20-25% of its own energy consumption. And actually we are really investing a lot to go from importers of energy to exporters. And in 2030, we are hoping to be energy exporters of renewable energy, I must say that. We are planning to invest like about 1.5 billion euro of our public money and then attract about 8.5 billion euro of private money as well. So this is going to affect our greenhouse emissions a lot. But the other side of a stick is circular economy. Mm-hmm. And I think we are doing in Lithuania right now not enough, and it needs a lot of changes in the mindset of companies and of consumers, and of course it needs more attention from the government as well. So my pledge is to launch initiatives during this year to change the mindset, and of course some initiatives that are aimed towards like practical work, like European digital innovation hubs, enable them in our country to provide businesses the right tools, the right knowledge, as President von der Leyen mentioned, skills, because we need them as well to move into circular economy.
To circular, we're going to check on that next year. Andrea, what's your pledge?
I would like to say three things. First of all, to repeat what I said at the COP26 Glasgow last year, which is the 30 by 30 pledge by NIB, i.e. between 2021 to 2030, we will be participating in financing at least 30 billion of projects that are considered green and sustainable. That's number one. Number two, we have changed our own strategy. Since our panel is called Be Bold, we have changed our own strategy so that we would be able to take a little bit more risk and tap more into private sector enterprises, also mid-sized enterprises and so on. And we are taking also on structures whereby, for instance, wind farms, we are now taking in some cases construction risk. Thirdly, and the proof is in the pudding on the second one. And again, I should also tell you that this year we're actually financing a total of 50% more new projects than we did last year. So this new strategy is in action. And the third point is the way we live our own lives. I remember when I joined NIB, I asked that, look, my office is really well equipped, but where is the bin? And I was told, Andre, we can get you a bin, but then you would be the only person with your own bin in the bank, because we sort our own recycling and we really do it. We have upgraded our own building to BREEAM certified green building. And personally, I have actually also made a commitment that I will use 25% less energy this winter. And I have taken measures to achieve that.
Thank you for that. Thomas, what's your pledge?
This came as a complete surprise to me that I was supposed to give a pledge. But let me first say that the European Investment Bank, our pledge is that 50% of our lending should go directly to climate-based or environmental sustainability-based investments. 100% of our lending must be Paris-aligned. So that is something that is really affecting our business today. And we pledge that during this decade, we will, together with our financing, we will crowd in so much so that we will see to that 1 trillion euros of investment will be done during this decade for climate and environment. And we think that is achievable, not least now it has become even more urgent. What I would personally like to do in my job is to work even harder to crowd in private capital. Because if you look at the needs, the investment needs and the actual gaps that we have in reality, There's no chance we can do this only with public money. There's no way. We need to crowd in private investments. And we do that by issuing green bonds. We did the first issuance 15 years ago. Now it has become a common tool. But also the way we use the money that we get via green bonds. Let me give you one example that is really exciting. We talk a little bit too little about traditional old-fashioned industry. Steel, cement, these kind of stuff that we really need if we're going to build good societies, but they are heavy polluters. We are now involved in the first green steel carbon-free plants, heavily involved in H2 green steel, that will use hydrogen in their processes to create and produce green steel. This is highly innovative and quite risky, of course, because there's a new frontier. But we are ready to be there to provide financing and thereby encourage private investors to come in, crowd in a second time, not only via our funding, but also via our financing to innovative projects. And hopefully bringing down the cost of using hydrogen, because we talk a lot about hydrogen, but it is still not commercially viable. We need to innovate and to take down costs so it really can be used for a green future.
Thank you so much. Frans, to you now.
Excellent. Great place to pick up with Thomas. So I want to start with the why. And, you know, in my studies, I learned that fear is the second most motivating human emotion. But the first most motivating human emotion is pride. And so the reason that we use crowd investing to mobilize capital for climate solutions is to give more people ways that they can be proud of owning a piece of the clean energy transition. And that's important because it's not to us friends and families and fools. It's friends, families, and futurists. It's folks that are looking ahead to the new economy, and they want a piece of it. They want to own some of it. They want to benefit from it. And everybody should have that opportunity. So, you know, and to Thomas's point about crowding in private capital, as the only American here on the panel, I will say, you know, our government has just passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a $375 billion investment in climate solutions. But Credit Suisse has estimated that the actual amount that the government will mobilize is closer to double that, 800 billion, and that will actually catalyze about 1.7 trillion in total funding because it draws in so much private capital as a result. So my pledge today is that I will help implement that Inflation Reduction Act here in the U.S., but at Raise Green, we will catalyze 10,000 individual investors to join the ranks of the banks and the large financial institutions in mobilizing that private capital. So I'm very much looking forward to checking in a year.
Exactly. So same here. Thank you so much. And Mayor Binay, your pledge, please, the final one here.
I didn't know there was a pledge, but the city has already committed to raise to resilience by 2030. So regardless of who the mayor is, if I am no longer the mayor, I will still be the mayor next year, but I won't be the mayor in 2025. But at least my pledge will be that there will be continuity even after my term, even when I'm no longer the mayor and I'm a private citizen. My city is committed to raise to resilience and all other commitments that we have embarked during my term, because that's one thing that's important: continuity. I'm sorry, Frans, because you said you're from the U.S. and you are a perfect example of the lack of continuity, because the previous administration. Let's not go there, but you know what I mean. So that's one thing that we really, really need. It's continuity and commitment.
Thank you so much. And on this note, I really want to thank all of the speakers. Wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we don't. Thank you so much for everybody joining here in Brussels and virtually as well. Thank you so much. We're going to take a short break now, and we're going to back at 3:30. Thank you. And welcome back to the EU Sustainable Investment Summit 2022. We carry on and we're going to have the next session, the final session of the day, that is called Brain is Gold. Make good use of it. But first of all, we have the keynote address by the Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Matthias Koman.
Friends, colleagues, thank you for inviting me to share the OECD's perspective on the role of jobs and skills in the green transition. Meeting our carbon neutrality objectives requires a profound transformation of our economies, how we produce energy, how we manufacture products, how we grow food, and how we transport products and people from place to place. To get there, we need innovation, we need investment, and we need enough people with the right skills to enable that transition. Demand continues to grow for workers in new occupations like sustainability specialists or energy auditors. The need for skilled workers in other professions will also continue to grow, such as engineers and electricians who have specific training in sustainable technologies. The green transformation taking place, of course, also at the same time as the accelerating and deepening digital transformation of our economies, will have a massive impact on labour markets. Both the green and digital transitions risk creating new divides. New firms will emerge, some will adapt, others will close. This will involve significant labour market churn. The International Energy Agency projects a global net gain of 9 million jobs in energy supply alone by the end of this decade, with 5 million jobs, though, expected to be lost in fossil fuel production. And while job losses associated with decarbonisation may be small overall, they will disproportionately be larger in several sectors and regions and may affect public support for the transition. It is essential then to give everyone the best possible opportunity to navigate those transitions and to participate in and benefit from the opportunities they create. The net zero transition will progress more quickly and more effectively if our citizens can see how achieving our climate goals is well aligned with economic well-being. Furthermore, in an era of tight labour markets and ageing populations in advanced economies, we need all of our human capital to be deployed to its best potential. So let me briefly highlight three key policy levers. First, we must upskill and reskill workers and provide early, well-targeted employment services. The successful reallocation of workers to green jobs depends on this. Skills gaps and shortages are already a bottleneck in sectors like renewables, energy and resource efficiency, and in building renovation. Some workers could transfer to green jobs with moderate upskilling in key green technologies, but many will need far more training. This will require much improved access to training, especially for low-skilled, more mature workers, who across the OECD are over 3 times less likely to participate in training than high-skilled adults. We will also need to identify transferable skills and align retraining programs with transition needs. Second, governments should leverage dialogue with social partners to help facilitate labour market transitions. Trade unions, employers and business organisations can help coordinate and promote retraining to take advantage of new opportunities in sustainable industries. Here again, the experience of the pandemic can be useful and instructive. Several governments in Europe worked with employers, trade unions and educational and training institutions to provide skills development to employees whose positions were affected by pandemic disruptions. Third, governments will need to tailor their labour market policies to particular regions and sectors, given that different regions and sectors will be affected by the green transition differently. Place-based policies will be necessary to ease the structural adjustment of economies that rely heavily on carbon-intensive industries. Policies tailored to local competitive advantages, opportunities and history will work best to get buy-in from local communities. For instance, resource-rich regions may benefit from reskilling strategies that enable a transition away from extracting hydrocarbons and towards extracting minerals used in low-carbon technologies. In closing, the net zero transition will not be possible without a transformation of our labour markets. A future-oriented labour policy will be required to tackle emerging skills shortages and to ensure a better distribution of surplus labour. This is essential to cushion potential downside impacts in carbon-intensive industries and to maintain our societal commitment to sustainability goals. I wish you well for your discussions today as you share ideas on how best to ensure our workforce is ready for the net zero transition the world so desperately needs. Thank you.
Brainese Gold made good use of it. Now, this is something we're going to be discussing now at the fourth session this afternoon. Now, here we're going to discuss knowledge, skills and education and training need related to the transition to green and more sustainable economy and society. Now, businesses will need to reskill. We've heard that now from the OECD. We've heard that during the day from the President of the European Commission as well. They will need to reskill and upskill their workforce, while the education and training system will have to adapt to the requirements of future jobs in green sectors and services. Now, the panelists here at the session, they will look at the challenges and the opportunities in this regard. Now, let me introduce the speakers. Here with me on stage, we have Xavier Mathieu, Director, European Training Foundation, and also Monica Skutasta, Director of Technical Assessment and Monitoring of the Council of Europe Development Bank, here with me in Brussels. Joining us online is Professor Shalini Bharat, Vice-Chancellor, Tata Institute of Social Sciences from Mumbai, India. We also have Claire Martinet, Director of Sustainability at Renault Group, and Vic van Vuren, Director, ILO Enterprises Department. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today at the EU Sustainable Investment Summit, and let's start this session. Let's start this discussion. Xavier, I would like to start here with you. Now, the 3 points now they're given by the OECD. We'll go with first upskilling, reskilling and employment, about skills gaps, the second government dialogue with social partners, and the third government tailoring labour market. Let's start with upskilling and reskilling. Let's start. How big is this issue these days? What is your take on it?
Thank you very much for inviting us to be here with you. I think this morning when the President of the Commission was giving her address, she put skills, people, she said, at the same level of the other investments, sustainable investments. And I think this is really something that we have to take, also considering that this is an investment in people. And when some studies say that there is a huge amount of companies in Germany who, for example, say that they cannot find the right skills, we also have to think that companies, when they make their decisions concerning technologies and concerning changes towards the green transition, they also have to think about skills. It's not that the skills, they made the changes and then skills adapt to those changes. I think this is something that has to be taken from a more strategic point of view. In any case, all the studies that we've seen concerning which will be the changes now, the OECD was mentioning some of them, imply that the overall change in the labor market probably will be positive in terms of jobs created and in the new economy, and those that are lost in sectors that are not anymore creating jobs or are destroying jobs. However, the big change is the people moving from one sector to another or within the sector. I think that's what gives the dimension of the upskilling and reskilling. And in general terms, I think we can say that there are some jobs that are created in green jobs, so jobs that most of their skills are considered green skills, directly related with this issue of carbon emissions and reducing waste and all these things. But the important thing is that the majority of jobs will have a greening transformation. So most of the jobs will change their skills composition, and in some way they all will be, in one way or another, requiring some time of upskilling and reskilling. So one thing is people changing their job, changing their sector. This is probably the priority and what become for the social impact this has. But then afterwards, to keep people in the companies, also this will require a lot of activities in training. And for that, the traditional position of firms asking public service or training providers to come and train people, this probably is not anymore useful. And what it is required is that the companies have a more active role in this upskilling and reskilling.
Well, Monica, what's your take on this? On how these roles change for companies as well? Yeah.
Well, I have to say that I very much concur with what Xavier just said. We were discussing that a little bit earlier. Indeed, I think that one of the key points that also came from the address of the Secretary General of OECD is the importance of looking at upskilling and reskilling not as a cost, really, but as an investment. This is really an investment into the future and the resilience of a company and of the communities that need to thrive with companies where the companies are located and the communities of their workers. And I think that this is an important element of responsibilities on the part of the private sector, in particular corporate private sector, in terms of thinking that in any event we have had shocks. We have continuous shocks that are coming at us, and therefore having a teachable, educated workforce is really an investment to become more resilient to any type of shock, and therefore making this effort for the green transition will, in the end, benefit a company throughout other shocks as well. And I would also like to say that it's not just about upskilling and reskilling in terms of workers, but it's really an ecosystem approach. It's about having educated and informed citizens. So we have to move from our perspective at Council of Europe Development Bank on the front of training, upskilling, reskilling, but also in terms of investment in education, investment in new curricula, and this is where also the public sector and the governments come in. And for us, this is fundamental because at Council of Europe Development Bank, as you were saying, the President this morning said the people are at the center of the green transition, and given that we are the multilateral development bank with an exclusively social mandate, we see really people at the center. We take a social lens when we think also of climate change, climate action, and the transition. And so for us, this is an absolutely central theme.
I want to talk a bit more about public-private partnerships a little bit later, but first, to set this thing, to get a better understanding, Professor Barad, Vice-Chancellor, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, India, what are the main challenges when it comes to these fundamental changes from your point of view? Can you hear us? You might be muted. I think you. Great.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well now.
Okay. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this very important summit. I think, the challenges are big, and what we talk about reskilling, upskilling, the role of education sector, the role of universities and schools is so critical in this. And I would like to say that when we talk about, workforce transition, it is not only the workforce, it is the entire management which also will have to, transition to meet the goals of a green economy. It is also how the entire, industry will change, removing all types of old, ways of functioning, and also making the workplace itself, green in that sense. And when it comes to talking about, who does this upskilling and reskilling and, transition to the green economy, the education sector is critical because for far too long it has not paid so much importance to embedding sustainability, embedding green economy in its, curricula and it is within its entire, school or college studies framework. In India, way back in 1991 and then later on again in 2003, the Supreme Court of India ruled that sustainability or environmental studies must be part of all education. And yet we see that this has not happened so fast, but it is catching on now. And I think unless and until we really train all our teachers, unless and until we bring curricula to, meet the goals and objectives of a green economy, the transition will not happen just by itself. It has to happen through the instrument of education. I'll stop for the moment.
Thank you so much. Vic van Vuren, Director, ILO Enterprises Department. What's the ILO view on this? Because surely this is one of the big focuses for the organization. And how do you see Europe set for this big change?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I think, first of all, we look at it from that the green transition is an economy-wide process, and all sectors will undergo changes towards sustainability and resilience with implications for their enterprises and their workers. But it doesn't mean that all sectors are going to be affected the same. And that's why country by country will have to look at their hotspots and how they're going to tackle this in a national context. From measures alone related to the energy systems, we see that there will be 25 million jobs created if all goes well and 7 million lost. And so when we look at the skills required, we're going to have to address it from reskilling, which has been mentioned by almost all the speakers, but we're going to need massive investment to train workers in the skills required for millions of new jobs. The problem is, what are those new jobs? And we're working on a program with LinkedIn to try and identify what are these new skills that are going to be needed across the different sectors. Now, we see renewable energy is repeatedly mentioned. Construction is going to be impacted upon, so skills will have to be added on or adapted, plumbers, electricians, and so on. And as we look towards a shift towards the circular economy, we predict 78 million jobs will be created, but almost 71 million jobs will be displaced. And once again, we need to see how can we take the existing workers, reskill, or to re-educate them. Now, when it comes to having the right skills and the way forward, we looked at a just transition guideline in 2015, and at the ILO with the workers and the governments and the employers, we put together these just transition guidelines to look at what are the elements that we see providing a positive impact. And we need to start with policy coherence. We need to look at addressing both technical and core skills. We cannot leave out the soft skills as we look towards a human-centered transition. We need to look at identifying and anticipating the skills needs. And we need social dialogue. And process is going to be just as important as content, because people need to be part of a process, the governments, the workers, the employers, in the enterprises. And lastly, we look at equity. And no one has mentioned gender. If we look at the just transition, we're going to find that if we go along with business as usual, the women are going to be on the wrong end of the scale, and the numbers are not going to be an equitable distribution. So when we have this opportunity now, we need to look at develop green jobs training initiatives for youth, older workers, people with disabilities, indigenous people, and in particular women, also migrant workers, unemployed, informal workers, and so on. But we have this opportunity to look at a more equal distribution. My closing point is that we need to also be aware of a widening gap between developing and developed economies. The developed economies are getting their act together. Yes, there's a lot to do, but my concern is that the education systems and policies in the developing world are lagging way behind. And unless we take a serious look and invest in that area, we're going to find the gap just widening between the South and the North. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's so much to follow up on from what you said, but I want to bring it to a different one. Well, you've said that it has to go with country by country, sector by sector, but also companies play a very important role there through their policies and how they operate. Claire Martinet, Director of Sustainability at Renault Group. What what's your view from Renault as a company when it comes to these big changes on the reskilling and then upskilling as well?
Yes, thank you for having me. Can you hear me well?
We can hear you very well.
That's great, thank you. So yeah, to circle back on what Victor and Vuren was saying, we are in the industry, in the automotive sector, in many hotspots because we are hit with obviously the energy transition and the decarbonization trajectory, which is one of our major challenges. We are also hit by the scarcity of resources, and that's where circular economy jumps in, and I'll come back to that. That's the second challenge. And the third one is obviously the digital revolution and the cars becoming more connected, more intelligent, and talking to the infrastructure, and that's the third one. So our take on that is exactly what Mrs. Shavat say about investing. To us, reskilling and upskilling is definitely something we conceived and invested in right from when we conceived our midterm plan, the Revolution, that our CEO announced a little over a year and a half ago, to transform into a green company, a tech company, and a company driven by new businesses, and to undertake this transformation the fairest way possible. We invested in what we called a Renault University, which is a university entirely dedicated to the transformation of skills of our employees. So this is when we talk about employability, but it is also meant to onboard the suppliers, the academics, and all the partners in our sector. And that's how we work also on employment. So we try and tackle both challenges with this university that has this ecosystem approach in the sense that we are not only addressing employability issues within our walls, but also within the whole sector, because as many of you pointed out, there are a lot of job losses within due to the fossil fuel transition. Our take on that is that if we integrate more of the value chain first, and if we expand more on it, there is a way to maintain employability and to even create employment. So if we take a country-by-country approach, and I'll close on that, in France, there were several studies meant by the PFA or by NGOs saying that the auto sector would lose 15 to 30% of employment by 2030. That's about 30,000 employments lost. At Renault, we launched a plan to recruit 2,500 people in the upcoming 3 years, and we've already started by recruiting 1,000 people in the past semester. And how did we do this? I mean, it's a lot of investment. It's not magic. It's really by expanding more on the value chain, reskilling, upskilling our employees, and creating new poles of activities along the circular economy value chain and the electrification one.
Thank you so much. I mean, there are so many, there are so many factors into this conversation because, of course, it is so complex. But I would like now to touch upon the importance of the dialogue between governments and social partners, but also when it comes to the importance of this. Yeah, let's put it this way, because I don't want to go into details because otherwise we're never going to finish this conversation, right? So we're going to go into the dialogue of public-private cooperation also between the governments. Xavier, your take, how important is that and how strong is this role? What is it that can be done there specifically also when it comes to this dialogue? I want to emphasize that, and then Monica, I want to ask the same question to you. When it comes to universities and education institutions.
Okay, thank you. I think the topic of private-public partnership in the field of education is not new. It's been for years there. We know that those partnerships are successful when they, first of all, are centered into the learning outcomes of the processes, and secondly, when the partners work together in most of the phases of the projects. I think this is something that also applies now in this case. Second thing, I think it is important that the public sector have a steering role there and creating some conditions in order to stimulate the different partners to participate. And it's not only firms and public bodies. Very often the civil society organizations have a very important role. And we saw that today in previous panels how important these organizations can play. Third thing, when you are talking about the university, I think there are two things here. One is universities in general have to incorporate into their curricula much more elements related with sustainability, both from the knowledge side, but particularly from the skill side. And they have to be more active in the transition from the university to the jobs. I think that's something that universities can do. And the other thing is that there is a number of type of studies which are between post-secondary and higher education, tertiary education, which are those which probably are more demanded now in terms of what is needed by the labor market in terms of the green transition. This is an area where much more cooperation between the industry and the education and training sector needs to take place. I think, as an example that you were asking, I think something that is very known for the entrance into the labor market, which is the work-based learning solutions, apprenticeships and so on. These are ideas that now every time more and more are extended to also other parts of the training, lifelong learning type of learning. And also, I think there are different forms which can take place, particularly, for example, when you are thinking in platform economy and other type of new forms of work where there is not a clear relationship between employer and employees, where also these type of forms of learning need to be developed much more. Then there are other forms of successful partnerships like skills councils, I think so on, but I think that's the most important that I could highlight.
Thank you. Monica?
I would say that I've been thinking about three aspects when thinking about also the role of the public, the role of governments in also encouraging the continuation of lifelong learning. I'm thinking about, I looked at the numbers, I looked at the disparities across countries, where we have for lifelong learning adults in lifelong learning that are about 11% of the 25 to 64 population group in the EU, but then you have certain countries that are twice, 3 times as much, and others that are in the single digit. So that's something where we need to look at ways in which the governments can work also with the private sector to try to encourage that. I've looked at some data from EIB surveys looking at what's the percentage of companies that are investing in employment training, and we go from 90% in Latvia to less than 20% in Greece. Therefore, there is a need really for governments to think in terms of incentives, be this, for instance, through conditional cash transfer or dialogue or regulation. But I think that then there are also other types of relationships and partnerships that can be nurtured in terms of really understanding how we can create the type of skills that are needed for the market, that are labor market ready. For instance, we're working, this is outside the EU, where we're looking at the financing of a research and development hub in Serbia. We're really working with local corporates to identify the type of training that is needed for the local market. And I think that this is also a role that we can have as development banks when working on financing these type of projects. I think this is a dialogue that needs to continue. And in terms of universities, because you were mentioning universities, there is a need, I think, to think of how we support our trainers and teachers and professors in this new field in a multidisciplinary way. We have a tendency to continue to have siloed approaches, and I think that in our support for the work of universities, where we mainly work on financing infrastructure, but the work on identifying structures that can enhance the multidisciplinary work is something that is really part and parcel of what we do. And I think that that is fundamental in a field such as the green transition, climate change in general, where you have to address this issue across different disciplines and attack it through different disciplines that need to talk to each other at university level in the same way in which we want them to talk to each other at the policy level, at the planning level, and across sectors.
Yeah, when I mentioned universities, I of course meant, in the bigger picture, the educational part of it, because it is so important. On your point, I would like to ask Professor Barat to comment on that. I believe you've got the reaction to that.
Yeah, the role of universities, right?
Yes.
Yeah. As I said earlier, whenever we talk about education or training, and now we are talking about not just skilling but reskilling and upskilling for a newer economy, for creating new kinds of workforce, it's very important that education sector responds and adapts itself to the emerging needs. It is and when we talk about education sector, it just does not only meet curricula where we can bring in the sustainability aspects and change our curriculum and so on. But a very important part of that is teacher training. Looking at education both from the point of view of curriculum and as well as from the point of teacher training, we realize that the education has to be very multidisciplinary. When I say multidisciplinary, it means that we need to bring the social science, the humanities, the STEM subjects, the science, engineering, maths, and all these subjects together, so that sustainability runs through all aspects of education. The other important point is that teachers have to be trained to impart that kind of education, to bring that curriculum into classrooms. One of the recent surveys that I was reading about found that less than 50% of all countries' curricula has anything to do with environment, anything to do with climate change. That means there are very large countries and a very large number of curriculum don't even mention this. And then naturally the teacher education is also lagging behind. It may be somewhere between 50% to 85% teachers only know what to teach in the classroom and how to teach. Professional education will also have to take the lead, because with emerging technologies of AI and nanotechnology, biodiversity, and so many things, it means that the challenges are huge for the education sector. And this cannot happen only at the tertiary education, at the universities level. It has to start from the schools. It has to start from the very beginning and right through up from schools to colleges to universities, and only then. So it's a long-term kind of a planning that we have to do. And I agree that it has to be country by country, but no country should be left behind. It also, when we talk about education, the aspect of equity really comes very strong, because the more we talk about education and bringing that education on a digital platform, we know that many people and many sections of the population probably will be left behind. How do we make sure that all sections of the population, all vulnerable and marginalized sections of the population, also get education which is meant to transition us to green economy?
And that's exactly something, thank you so much, because that's exactly something that I wanted to continue with, on the importance of nobody to be left behind, whether this is, we're talking country by country, sector by sector, some groups of the population, because this is exactly the point where there is this, of course, urgency on transitioning and to do it as quickly as possible. But at the same time, we don't want to see some of these gaps and some of the inequalities getting worse. And Vikwan Buren, what's the ILO overview over that? Because you're specifically taking this bigger look as well to see and to identify some of these inequalities.
Yes, when we put our guidelines together, it was important for us that we addressed how you go from point A to point B, because it's not something that's a quick fix. And the first thing we need to recognize is that we cannot put climate change in a box and say, no, this is how we're going to deal with it. We have to look at the realities of economic growth. We need to look at the social deficit, and we need to look at the climate change together. This is an integrated process. So when you're dealing with policy at the national level, or whether you're looking at a sectoral policy, or even at enterprise level, you have to build in economic growth, social deficit, and the environmental components together. And we need to be mindful of that. The next is the process itself. we need the process to be inclusive at the national, sectoral, and at the enterprise level. And they need to be linked when one looks at the national policy. And that is an important component for us. And what we're finding is that we're starting to look at very silo-driven approaches, and that's not going to work. Also, we need to look at the displacement of communities. In some countries, you close down a coal mine. But when you put up your renewable energy plants, they're not often in the same area as the coal mine, they're somewhere else. And so you've got to look at displaced communities and how you negotiate with them, because they're not going to agree on the closing of a coal mine very easily if they know they're going to be without a jobs and livelihood and have to relocate to a different part of the country. It's a very sensitive and drawn-out process sometimes, but we have to get our hands dirty and get involved in these processes. We also need to look at the role of the private sector. We can't just ring-fence countries. We have to build in the supply chain as well, because you're going to find that the companies who are involved in supply chains are going to be more advanced in some parts of the world than other parts of the world. So enterprises in the supply chains begin to play a very important role with the transfer of knowledge, with the expertise in processes. So yes, it's not an easy process, but if the leaders in all these different dimensions can look at this holistically, then we do see a very opportunistic approach and a positive outcome at the end of the day. So yes, we look at it from a process rather than a quick fix.
Claire, I would like you to follow up on that when it comes to what we just heard when it comes to the company specifically and the supply chains. What's your view on that? Because that's exactly something that you could share your expertise at.
Yes. On the supply chain and on the value chain, I just want to circle back, just before getting into that, to what Mrs. Schratt was saying on the lack of existing training when it comes to sustainability and special skills. Even in France or in Europe, if you're implementing a plant dedicated to circular economy, as we did in Flins, or if you're implementing a huge facility to produce up to 1 million electric powertrains, you can't find people trained to work in those plants. It does not exist. It does not come out of the schools. You need to train them, and the trainings do not exist. So we, as a sector, took the lead and created training together with some of our suppliers. So, for instance, not to name them, but Forvia or some energeticians, where we worked together to develop modules of training so that our employees and theirs could be trained to the new needs for the production of electric vehicles. So that's an example, and it's the same for circular economy. We've been investing in that sector for 15 years now. We have a whole plant entirely converted from the production of ICE vehicles to circular economy. It was no walk in the park. The training was massive. We trained about 300 people for now, but we have a plan to train 3,000 people in this sole plant in the upcoming 2 to 3 years. And the training doesn't exist in the initial training to eco design, for instance, or to people who know how to dismantle a car or how to select and process the materials so that they can be recycled. It's a whole new set of skills that is not infused yet in the initial training, and that's why our approach is ecosystemic, because we do need the help of academics and schools to develop such skills. So it was just a short comment, because I could only concur with what was said earlier. And so as for our supply chain, that's also, how can I say, an area where European funds could help us, because obviously we're investing in our plants, in the ones that we own. So we're investing in Flins, we're investing in Normandy, in pedagogical machines and tools that foster vocational and hands-on training, pragmatic training. We'd love to do it VR, and to extend it all along our supply chain, where we don't, own the companies, but we can extend it to them, even if it's in remote countries outside Europe where we don't have facilities, but we could, as you say, extend our expertise in processes. So we could develop innovative pedagogical tools right from where we are implemented all along the supply chain. And it's it's an onboarding process that we really do need to tackle. And that's why we took this ecosystemic approach too. But the virtual reality is still to be developed, and we'd be very happy to be helped for that initiative.
Thank you so much. Monica, I would like you to comment on that, but I also want to move to this kind of final. We're running out of time. I'm so sorry. But, you know, every time today during each session, we asked the speakers to make a pledge, right? So we can check on it next year. Now, for this session, I think I would like to hear from you, maybe not the pledge that you take, but the pledge that you think should be taken when it comes to the skills and the importance of that. I would like to hear these rather brief, comment from each speaker on what do you think should be the pledge as from where you stand. Monica, please.
Okay, well, I was not going to come in on that one. If you allow me 2 seconds to reflect what I wanted to say.
You're welcome, dear.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay.
It's going to be part of what I'm going to say. I just wanted to jump on a couple of things that I heard about the importance of leaving no one behind. In a way, because of where I come from, because of the nature of our institution, maybe I take that too much for granted. But clearly for the Council of Europe Development Bank, the focus on inclusion of the most vulnerable is part and parcel of every project that we finance. And I think that is indeed a fundamental part, maybe, of the pledge that we should be making.
Exactly.
The second, I wanted to jump on the word process that was used, and because this is also part of a pledge that I think could be put on the table. I wanted to simply indicate that we have developed a process that is called constructing education, which is our approach to the way in which we develop education infrastructure and work on education infrastructure with our counterparties, which is about making sure that we focus on the learning outcomes, and therefore we involve teachers, principals, local authorities, students, all of the stakeholders in understanding how this infrastructure can best be used and maximize the outcomes. And I think that what I would like to see and what we would like to also continue working on is continue working on this approach and see how this can be transferred to maximize learning outcomes related to the transition. One final plea from me, from us in terms of what I would like to see. We've been focusing a lot on the transition to a low-carbon economy. I would like to see in a more integrated approach what is needed in terms of developing the skills and where are the opportunities also for retraining, reskilling, and even transferring jobs when we take into consideration also both the impacts and the opportunities of the transition to a resilient economy. And there, the territorial approach is fundamental. And in my view, we are maybe missing a beat or missing an opportunity by focusing on two aspects in isolation at European level. Thank you.
Thank you. This is why I asked, the speakers this time to think not of the pledge that you make, but to think of the pledge that you think should be made. Because what the subject of our discussion here is like we know where we want to be, but we're still figuring out how do we get there and how to make it in the most inclusive possible way. Xavier.
Yes, I would say we are talking about sustainable investment and sustainability for years already. We know that is a triple dimension, has environmental, economic, and social. And very often we are tempted to focus only on one part, and I think this is not working. We see in countries, for example, that they say, well, first I want to grow, then I will think about the greening aspects and then the equity. No, I think you have to do the three things together. So when there are investments, big investments from banks or small investments in companies, it is always important to think from skills from the very beginning already when you are analyzing the investment. That's, for me, an important pledge. The other thing is that we are in the European Year of Skills, and what we are going to insist a lot is in all the things that we will be participating in the year, in different events and different studies and different projects, is we will always put this greening transition with the dimension, of course, greening skills, but also digital and also the inclusive side at the front of these discussions.
Thank you so much. Professor Barad, what's your priorities, shall I say, the pledge that you think should be there?
So I would say that whatever pledge we take or whoever takes should have equity and inclusivity very strongly embedded in that pledge, because only when we take everyone along with us will we actually make an impact globally. So those two are extremely important. And I would like to say that it should be a whole of the education sector approach, not one segment of it, because a lot of the time people only talk about curriculum being adapted and so on. But I think so much depends on what teachers, quality and teacher training is involved. And a fourth part of, this pledge should be on partnership, because I don't think, even education sector will alone be able to, manage the transition to a green economy. The partnership with the government with the corporate sector, the private sector is going to be very critical, and not only in terms of the financial investment, but also in terms of technology transfer or transfer of skills from one sector to another. So these would be the elements I would like to see in a pledge. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cléa Martinet.
Yes, same. I think equity would play a major part in the pledge, because we can see that, to remain very humble, we can only do what we can do, within our walls and our immediate partners and suppliers, but we cannot onboard everyone. So we need, in a partnership approach and in a very transverse, cross-functional, cross-sector approach, to onboard as many people as we can and have this territorial approach. That's also something very important to us, because obviously we cannot create a pool of employment when some others are closing, 3 kilometers from where we are. So this is equity and partnership, and also a very territorial approach would be very beneficial for us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Vic van Vuren, finally.
Yes, I think from a pledge point of view, I think the governments have to take a lead on this. And the private sector is important, workers are important, but governments need to pledge at the macro level. We've got Climate Action for Jobs initiative with 52 governments on board. We need more governments to come on board to these global initiatives, which are extremely important, and to pledge their involvement, which will then benefit them at a country level. We need the private sector to pledge to get involved and use the value chains, particularly down into the developing economies, to use that leverage to bring about more effective and integrated management in these developing economies. And lastly, we need workers to come on board and understand that there's going to be a change. They need to pledge to accept there's going to be change. It's not business as usual, and that their workplaces will be disrupted to a certain extent. But with their pledge and commitment to the future, we can reskill and redesign the workplaces for the better of all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all of the speakers who participated in this final session of the day of the second EU Sustainable Investment Summit. Thank you so much for being here. That was the final session of the second EU Sustainable Investment Summit. And I think it's really interesting how the final session was the one when we were talking about the skills, because skills clearly are the currency of the future, and it's hard to overestimate the importance of it. And as the President of the European Commission said today, the European Union now has the strongest labour market in years, but there is still shortages when it comes to some of the skills that are needed. And more than 40% of the EU firms are experiencing some shortage and some complications when it comes to those. This is the situation that we tried exactly to identify here, some of the biggest challenges, and of course to find some of the solutions, because as the President of the European Commission said, people are indeed driving those positive changes, and this is why this conversation and this discussion over the skills and the people is very important. When it comes to the transition and the urgency of it, in concluding remarks, I would like to go a little bit early into what Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni said when he said that all the sectors are in one way or another, they depend on the energies, that indeed the businesses across the European Union now are facing the problems that they should not be facing. And one of the keys here as well, as he said, would be, of course, the issue of skills, but also stepping up international partnerships, but the partnerships with what the European Union also identifies as trusted partners. And we have heard from some of those trusted partners and the governments and authorities from all over the world today during our summit. And now for the closing remarks, we're going to have the road to COP27, the remarks by Frans Timmermans, Executive Vice President of the European Commission for the European Green Deal.
The opportunity to address you today. We're just 10 days before the start of COP27, this year's climate summit. In the next weeks, a lot of eyes will be on Sharm el-Sheikh, where negotiators will have to make further progress in keeping the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius and look for breakthroughs in how to finance the global climate transition. To tackle this climate crisis, global ambition in cutting greenhouse gas emissions must increase. No amount of funding will ever suffice to keep the consequences of a 3 or 4 degree world in check. Each country must set ambitious targets and carry out the policies to implement them. This applies in particular to the world's major economies, who represent 80% of global emissions. In the European Union, we're fully committed to the European Green Deal and achieving climate neutrality by 2050. This is an ambition set in law and underpinned with a concrete plan. Our Fit for 55 package is now in the final stages of negotiation. In other words, the EU is on the verge of adopting a coherent set of measures that will actually get us there. Since February of this year, we've had to deal with the impact of Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine and his weaponizing of energy. And as we work to secure energy supplies and alleviate the burden of high energy costs, we're not losing sight of the fact that we also have a climate crisis ongoing. We cannot tackle one without tackling the other. The transition to renewable energy is our ticket out of this energy crisis. It is why we're speeding up the decarbonization of our economies and ramping up energy savings. The European Union is not just staying the course, the geopolitical situation is strengthening our resolve. Of course, Europe's green transition cannot happen without the necessary private and public financing, the very focus of our discussions here. On the one hand, because implementing the Green Deal requires specific investments. We've calculated at 520 billion euros per year. And on the other hand, because the climate crisis in itself is a financial risk. And what goes in Europe goes across the world. Public finance plays an important role, and developed nations have to support climate-vulnerable countries in both the transition and in adapting to the consequences of the climate crisis that are already here. The EU and its member states are the world's largest contributors of climate finance. We continuously seek to increase and improve this support. But we cannot do this alone. Other developed countries need to follow through, whether on delivering the $100 billion goal or on doubling adaptation finance. And we need private investment. This is absolutely critical. To reach the goals of the Paris Agreement, we need to shift trillions, and public finance alone can never be enough. With regulatory security, a stronger role for multilateral development banks, and a review of the global financial architecture, we can start that shift in earnest. Against this backdrop, the upcoming COP27 is not just a place to discuss the level of global climate ambition in this critical decade. It's also the place to make progress on discussions around climate adaptation, loss and damage, and to reconfirm our resolve in supporting vulnerable partners. Loss and damage associated with the adverse effect of climate change is an increasingly serious challenge. The European Union is committed to strengthening and scaling up support for the institutions and initiatives that already assist vulnerable communities. And we have supported including this topic on the agenda of COP27 so that countries can discuss together the best ways to do so. In the coming weeks, we'll continue to work hard with international partners for the best possible outcome in Sharm el-Sheikh. The European Union has been leading in the fight against climate change. It is truly an existential challenge which pervades every aspect of life and every sector of our economy. I therefore count on your support and cooperation as we move towards a climate-neutral, healthy future for all.
These were the closing remarks by Frans Timmermans, and on this note I would like to thank everybody who participated in the EU Sustainable Investment Summit. Now, thanks a lot to all the speakers who participated, to everybody who was here in Brussels with us, to those who connected virtually, also to all the participants, more than 1,500 people who are participating today during the day, again either here in person in Brussels or virtually. Thank you so much for joining this second Sustainable Investment Summit, and if I just may, we've heard so much from the pledges that we've during the day, and we will check on those pledges next year, of course. And the final words, think of some of those yours, some personal pledges that each of us can make to make things better. Thank you so much. Bye.